This podcast is brought to you by The Pod Tower, hosted by the Watchtower Database. Visit youtube.com/thepodtower for informative, hilarious DC animation-themed podcasts and live streams every week. And check out the Watchtower Database for DCAU video essays, timelines, fan theories, and more. And please, enjoy the show.
Intergang.
Welcome back, everybody. This is another Watchtower Database exclusive interview. We have with us Stan Berkowitz. Stan worked on all sorts of your favorite childhood cartoons, but extensive work on the DC animated universe that we cover all the time. Superman, the animated series, New Batman Adventures, Batman Beyond, Justice League Unlimited. Welcome, Stan. Thank you for being here.
And Static Shock, too.
Yes. Oh, how did I not see that? I wrote it in there at some point. We always ask everyone this. What was your favorite superhero as a kid, if you had one?
Well, that was easy. That was the George Reeves Superman.
Okay.
It came on when I was really little. I mean, before I could read.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that show was the first interaction I had with popular culture. Because I don't remember the first time I saw it. That meaning it goes back that far.
Yeah.
I remember being an absolute addict of it. I remember having my mom dye a sheet red so I could have a cape to wear. And
awesome.
Fake glasses to whenever he did the transition from Clark to Superman, I would try to copy that. Again, I'm like a little kid, like a 3-year-old sitting on a stuffed animal watching the show.
Mm-hmm.
After I could read, I remember my father, I was about 8 years old. He brought home some comic books, and it was the first time I'd seen Batman.
Yeah.
And also the first time I'd seen Superboy. I knew about Superman, but it was the first time I'd seen Superboy. Batman, because it was more realistic, a little more realistic.
Sure.
I was able to, I found that more appealing. So I guess I went from Superman to Batman, and then probably about 2 years after that, 2 years of very, very extensive comic book purchasing. Then out came Green Lantern Showcase, I think, the Hal Jordan one from about 1959.
Yeah.
It was 59, right?
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And then Hal Jordan, this Green Lantern's even cooler because of the science fiction aspect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then of course, I think within about a year, that's the Justice League comic book came out, The Brave and the Bold, with Starro on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, as a 10-year-old, begging my parents, we have to go to the newsstand today. No, they don't have it today. Go back the next day. Until I finally got it.
Even then, it was sold out all the time. Yeah.
Wow.
It was easy enough to purchase. I mean, Right now you want to buy one, what is it, a couple $1,000s?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I got a copy of that one through the Justice League Archives, the hardback collection that they put out probably 20 years ago. It's a fun issue. You mentioned Superboy being in the comics.
Oh, yeah.
Some of those first comics you got. And that was also your first writing credit was on the 1990s Superboy show. First superhero credit. Could you walk us through how you got started in writing for TV and animation, and then how working on Superboy might have influenced your writing career on superhero shows afterwards?
I was a film student. I mean, I was a little kid, like I guess 13, making movies with my friends. Basically, I guess you saw The Fabelmans, right? So it's basically copying the genres, the crime stories, shooting, killing, even the thing, pricking the film with a pin to simulate a gunshot,
mm-hmm.
all that stuff. And in roughly the same era as Spielberg, although I believe he is 2 or 3 years older than me, so he was ahead chronologically. But I was always making that stuff. I went to college and I thought, well, there's really nothing I want to do other than that. And at UCLA, they had a pretty big film department, so I got into that and made student films, which are, I didn't have to prick the film with. And then, you leave school, and apparently the studios don't haunt the halls of UCLA or maybe even USC demanding students come sign with them. So it was a long period of working odd jobs, working on film crews, working in a film post-production house, but always writing spec scripts, because I have an MFA in screenwriting. So I went from production to screenwriting and writing scripts for years, until finally, there was a couple of small sales, nothing important. Mm-hmm. And then finally I was able, I think in my mid-30s, I was able to finally quit my day job and write full time on basically crime shows. Mike Hammer, TJ Hooker, Houston Nights. Just totally out of the blue, my agent called and they said, "Can you go live in Orlando for a year?" And I was single at the time, just a small apartment. I went, "Sure." And that was Superboy. I had no background in comics other than the fact that as a child I'd read them.
Yeah.
So I think the issue there was that they wanted to, the people who'd been producing Superboy for the first 2 seasons wanted to expand the audience a little bit, from the children who they knew were watching and trying to get more adults to watch. And they looked at me with, adult shows, and they hoped that I could, bring in the adults to watch it. Problem was, it was always going to be called Superboy.
Yeah.
And that's just a title that adults, I think, kind of shied away from, or they just weren't inclined to see that kind of thing.
Sure.
How'd you move into animation from there, from doing the live action work?
I wish this story seemed more directed, as opposed to just stuff happening at random. But really, that is what happened at random. The representatives from DC on Superboy were Mike Carlin and Andy Helfer, and they pushed very hard to have me hire as a freelancer and then as a staff writer a guy I didn't know at the time named Mark DeMattis, J.M. DeMattis. And I did hire him. He did great work. When the show was over, after a couple of years, he said he was living in upstate New York. He called me to say, "Hey, listen, they're starting a Spider-Man show in your neck of the woods, which is Los Angeles. I'm going to recommend you for it." And he did. And that's how I started doing the animation, which turned out to be not that different in terms of writing style or anything. Not quite as adult. You couldn't deal with death, swearing,
right.
No advanced sexuality other than kind of puppy love.
But it's still, Spider-Man still had all that drama to it, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember, I think that's probably my entry point to your work is, despite the fact that we do the DCAU channel, I grew up on Spider-Man because it came out a few years after Batman, and Batman aired while I was a toddler. And I was like, the 3 or 4 year old, kind of like you were with George Reeves' Superman.
Right.
And I ate that show up as a kid. Right. And some of my favorite episodes were the ones dealing with Venom, which you had a large hand in. And I don't remember where I picked this up from recently. It might have been a John Semper interview or something along those lines. But to my understanding, that was like the first time that the symbiote impacted like Peter Parker's like mental state or his personality, I guess you could say. How much of a hand did you have in that? Or was that like just something that was handed to you from story editors? What was it like working on Spider-Man?
Very different questions.
Just say yes or no.
In terms of how it affected Peter's personality, I wasn't aware of what had been said about that in the comic book. Basically, John just said to me that the suit would make Peter much more aggressive. And I don't remember what I thought about that. It was either that I was wondering, did this come from, I didn't even wonder whether it came from John or from the comic book. I guess I assumed it came from the comic books, but if you're telling me that was original with John, I'll be happy to believe that too. But either way, I thought it was great that Peter could finally be more of a badass. And it made him rougher and tougher. And I loved writing that.
Louder for sure. Yeah.
Louder. wherever it came from, whether it'd been in the comics before John or whether John originated, I was really happy to work in that mode, to have Peter much more aggressive, because he often seemed a little too diffident, a little too shy. But once the symbiote had taken over and affected his personality, I thought, this is great. I love writing this. Whoever it came from, it didn't come from me. I know that. But
there we go.
But I certainly enjoyed that change of his character.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that'd be a lot of fun to deal with. Gives you much more range.
Being in the writing room with Stan Lee, Avi Arad,
wow,
the network, and then the guy from Marvel, and just how crazy it was to get anything done.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I've heard so many behind the scenes stories about that show. It seemed like it was a hassle at times.
Well,
yeah, I almost wish we could just talk about Spider-Man for the next 3 hours. Honestly,
is that a hint that I've gone off on a tangent?
No, I'm saying like for all of us, it's very near and dear to us. Like I definitely, one of my earliest memories of my own like VHS tapes that like belonged to me as a kid were the Robin's Reckoning BTAS tape and the
that was Randy Rogel.
Yeah, and the Symbiote Saga Spider-Man tape. So those were like repeated 1,000 million times. Yeah.
I got those when they came to DVD. So that Spider-Man show was also my first introduction to the character before I saw the Tobey Maguire movies. And it's would love that cartoon.
Well, good. Yeah. Good.
I mean, this isn't a question. I shouldn't be asking extra questions, but going from a writing room with Stan Lee to a writing room without Stan Lee, I mean, I'm sure that it's a completely different experience on the DC shows anyway. But
no, it wasn't. No. It wasn't.
Same squabbles.
And at that time, at that time, he was a comic book legend, but he wasn't a famous international celebrity. He was still a guy who could, go for a walk in Beverly Hills, and every now and then a young man would meet him. It's, oh yeah, you're Stan Lee, but he could, go about his business without being swamped by people. But he was also a writer. He was. This is going to sound pejorative, but he was just a writer in the sense that you sit in the room with him. He suggests ideas. If you have a better one, he'll listen to it. He'll try to make your ideas better. Very constructive, very helpful.
Yeah.
And in terms of going to DC, there really wasn't a writer's room per se. The closest we had to a writer's room was everybody going out to lunch together. Most of the time we sat in our rooms alone writing. And the person we dealt with was Alan Burnett. Mm-hmm. And Alan, not that different from Stan Lee in the sense that he wanted you to do good work. He was very happy when you turned in a script that he didn't have to edit very much. And he expected you, when he had a good idea, to take it and not, give him a big fight about it. I know they were called producers, executive producers, but they were, in essence, they were writers in the best sense. They wanted to create good material.
Yeah.
And I was lucky to work with both of them.
So whenever you're on an episode that Alan or Paul Dini or someone else is like the credited writer, but you're like story by or teleplay by or something like that, like, can you kind of walk us through a picture of what that looks like? Because I know for our side of like on-screen live action filmmaking, it's a very different process, or at least as I understand it anyway.
It isn't.
Okay. Well, there we go.
No, I mean, if you're making a feature film, you'd go through many, many, many more rewrites, and this writer will get fired, you bring in another writer and all that. Let me give you a typical one, and I can't relate it to any specific episode, but for example, an episode wherein Paul would have written the story and I might have written the script. Mm-hmm. Without my involvement, Paul would have been talking to Alan for a long time about an idea. And they'd go back and forth, and Paul would eventually write up a prose outline for a half-hour episode running between 12 and 15 pages, double-spaced. And then Alan would just look around, who's available, and he'd give it to me. And then I would take that prose outline and turn it into a script, shot by shot, which of course the outline wouldn't have. The outline is basically giving someone who maybe doesn't know, the specific terms in a teleplay, but anyone could read it and say, okay, I see what this story is going to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the writer, the teleplay writer, would sit down and write it in the correct form and also write the dialogue. What always happens first, at least for everything I've worked on, and I mean everything, you have that prose story. Whoever wrote it gets the credit for writing it. And then when that prose story is done, the person who wrote that prose story very often goes ahead and writes the teleplay.
Okay.
And occasionally, when, like for example, in the thing I gave you before about Paul, maybe Paul's busy going on to do something else and doesn't have time to write the script, and another writer gets to write it. In that case, the credit is usually story by writer A, teleplay by writer B. If the same writer writes the story and the teleplay,
then it's just written.
The credit says written by.
Yeah. Okay. That makes so much more sense to me now than it did before. So thank you.
well, here's what's not going to make sense.
No.
When we did the animation for both Marvel and DC, the producers had the right, because of a fairly weak union, to put in any credit they wanted to put in.
Oh,
wow!
They didn't. Usually, they didn't do that. I think, at least looking at my own work that I did for Marvel and DC, I think the credits were always very fair. But because the union does not, or generally does not, oversee the credits, the producers can just put anybody's name they want on them. Mm-hmm. When anything is covered by the Writers Guild of America or the Writers Guild of Canada, the credit process is determined by a potentially very lengthy arbitration process. The studios have no control over the credits. It's the union that controls the credits when something is written under Writers Guild coverage.
You hear that, kids? Join a union.
Yeah.
You know what? Don't get me started. In my house, we're in 4 unions. For me, it's
wow.
Writers Guild of America, Writers Guild of Canada, and IATSE, which covers a lot of the animation I've done. And the 4th one is my wife, who's in SAG, Tegan Clyde, if you want to look her up.
Well, I don't have the next question.
I've got the next question, don't I? I was opening up with the next tab.
I thought you were going to leave the 4th union as a joke and just say my wife. Just my wife. That was like, we're a total union house, and the benefits have been incredible. I mean, you have to fight to get unions sometimes, and it's always been worth it. When you're an outsider, you look and you say, well, you have to pay dues and all that stuff. But boy, that stuff comes back to really benefit you later on in terms of healthcare and pension and all that stuff. Because when you're freelancers, you don't really have that.
So you wrote one of the most powerful and memorable DCAU episodes of all time. A lot of people have put this on the top of their Superman the Animated Series shortlist. The Late Mr. Kent. It's got incredibly deep themes related to abuse in law enforcement, the death penalty, wrongful convictions, and more. Some of these themes are also brought up in Superman's first ever appearance in Action Comics #1. Was it intentional to parallel that, or was there something in the news at the time that influenced the story and had it on your mind?
Nothing in the news, and no attempt to parallel Action Comics. What had happened was that when we started on Superman, Paul Levitz came out to California to visit the writers, and talk about different Superman stories and areas that would work to help us create stories. And one of them, I don't remember too much that he said, but one of the things I do remember was that he said, sometimes a good story can be had by giving Clark a problem that reflects on Superman. So I instantly thought, what if we kill him? What if we kill Clark? And then, of course, I'd always loved film noirs.
Yeah.
For a long, since high school, watching those old Alan Ladd movies, Humphrey Bogart. And so it was kind of a mixture of the two. I mean, allowing Superman to narrate it.
Yeah, exactly. I love the
Absolutely.
noir aspect of that episode.
And then the part that everybody likes was created by Alan, where I think just, I was finishing the script and he was giving me notes and he said, "Hey, wait a minute, come in my office. I want you to have him executed, and then remember, just as the pellets."
Oh my God.
That was Alan suggesting that.
That's definitely, that comes up a lot of like, how in the world did they get, like, where did they get away with this? How did
they got away with it? Because the pellets never hit the chemical.
Yeah.
You
don't see him die or whatever.
Yeah, because we're not, when we were doing those cartoons, we weren't allowed to show death or even mention the word death or dead or anything like that. There are moments when you're working where there's a lot of creativity, and like there's that eureka moment where I'll have this scene, this will be great. Like the eureka moment that Alan must have had when he thought about showing the gas chamber. But the rest of the time, it's very similar to an assembly line. Hurry up, finish this, get on to the next one. And then 6 months later, when the thing comes back from Asia and it's all animated, you don't even remember what you wrote. Plus, one does a lot of work after finishing a show like that.
Yeah.
And it's more stories, more eureka moments, on and on and on and on like that. And after 20 years, I mean, do you guys remember specific moments from your college classes? Maybe
right,
a few.
Yeah.
Maybe a few.
Only when I find the papers and then I'm like, oh yeah, because I'm looking at them again
at some point.
I feel like
I'm a hoarder, I guess, and I've kept my college essays.
When you see the essays, do you look at them and go, I don't remember this. Was this written by a stranger?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I do think that. Yeah.
That's what the scripts feel like sometimes.
Jumping ahead a few years, another episode that you did for Justice League in Blackest Night kind of handled similar themes to the late Mr. Kent. Was it just a passion of yours to talk about wrongful convictions, or was it these both stories handed down to you? Or
yes, it was a passion of mine plus a hatred of lawyers. My favorite line was, "We solved our lawyer problem a long time ago."
Yeah.
No, that's
That
how
one's a
we solved
classic.
our lawyer problem. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to Superman. So you also wrote the Prometheon. The Prometheon is based off the Promethean giants from Jack Kirby's The New Gods books, and even recently still appears in DC Comics. Like he was in the Justice League annual from a couple of years ago, just floating in space in the background. So I guess the question I'm getting to is, the Promethean has these fourth world elements to him in the comics, but was there ever anything in the back of your head to connect him more towards those Jack Kirby concepts? Because it's not explicitly mentioned in the episode.
It was not up to me anyway, but the people the artists, including Bruce, especially Bruce, are all Jack Kirby fans. So I'm sure it was in their minds, that the Promethean would be similar to something that Kirby created.
Yeah, they're usually the guys who are hanging out there on the source wall. They're the edge of the universe.
The artists were just huge fans of that stuff. So
Yeah.
clearly they put that in. For me, the Promethean
That's
was
fun.
just sort of a slave laborer,
Mhm.
a golem. A
Mhm.
golem, as I think that's a better description of him.
Sure.
A creature that was just existed to work, but it was pretty much brainless, and therefore was able to cause a whole bunch of damage. I mean, for the younger people listening to this, Jesus, younger. I mean, talking about Fantasia now. It's Mickey Mouse and the broomsticks in Fantasia. It's the same, it's the same concept. We even did a golem story in Superboy. I mean, the golem essentially is an argument for you doing your own work.
Mm-hmm.
It might even be an argument against slavery, if you think about it. Because here's this mindless thing that just keeps doing the same thing over and over again because it's not allowed to think, or it's incapable of thinking. And with slavery, the people who are enslaved are not allowed to think for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, going back to the ancient origins of the golem, perhaps that was the author's intention, was to condemn enslavement. I mean, back then, the possibility of a mechanical man or a robot or anything was impossible. That was, you're talking about, when is this, 1,000 years ago?
Right.
But now, of course, it is possible. So the golem.
We're the alien planet now.
Well, I mean, you've seen these stuff on YouTube with robots that do jumping jacks and we can tumble and all that stuff. How soon before they start doing our work for us?
Yeah.
I just saw robot arms making you coffee at the mall yesterday, so we're headed there.
Well, don't tell my wife that. I make her coffee in the morning, and
it's my one thing that I get to.
I hate to be replaced by that.
We believe that there was also a different ending to the end of that Prometheon episode. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was just a tacked on ending, wherein the thing's floating in space again, and different aliens find it and think, oh, this could be great. This thing could do all of our work for us.
kind of like a Jumanji ending. Huh?
Yeah. It all just starts all over again. Yeah.
Well, but it's the same problem. Yeah. It's the same problem. People not wanting to do hard labor.
I did think it was interesting how much of the fourth world stuff made it into Superman. Like, it was so integral to like the tone of the show and how everything connected and everything. And then to bring in like a typically, classically Jack Kirby character and just like, oh, he's not at all like just, versus making up a completely new thing. But I do appreciate the visual nod kind of a deal. So.
Well, I mean, didn't we have Mr. Miracle, Big Barda?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, Darkseid himself.
Yeah. All that much more in your face stuff.
And the old lady who was voiced by Ed Asner.
Yeah.
Granny Goodness.
Yeah.
Granny Goodness.
It's a classic.
Yeah, we couldn't get the lady from Golden Girls to do it.
Oh, was that really what y'all were wanting to do?
I'm not sure. I think it was much better to have Mr. Asner do it.
Are you talking about B. Arthur? Is B. Arthur?
Yeah, B. Arthur.
Okay. Her name
Was escaping me.
I had to make sure.
Yeah. It's same voice. I mean,
it really is. Yeah, now that I know the hair's pretty similar too. So you're talking about growing up with all of these, like you're there as it's happening with Hal Jordan and that kind of Starro and that kind of stuff. Yes. Is that when you would bring in characters like that into episodes that you have the writing credit on? Did you feel any sort of like, oh man, I have to really like get this right, or was it just like any other episode and it just happened to have that extra character in it, like Etrigan or Dr. Fate or whatever?
It was worse than that.
Okay.
Because, they had a huge collection of comic books
at
Warner's Animation. And at first it's, oh, this is wonderful. I can go back and revisit my youth.
Yeah.
Then you'd read them and you'd go, God, there's nothing I can use here.
This sucks.
Well, I'm not saying it sucked. I
get you.
A million children at its height. DC had a circulation of 1 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that about right?
I believe so.
I don't know. Ted would know.
Yeah. So, I mean, it worked for children, but then you're looking and going, well, children today are more sophisticated at their age than I was at their age. And these stories aren't going to work. Yeah. So we had to, the writers were obliged to figure out new and somewhat more sophisticated stories that, people could watch. Our intended audience wasn't just children. It was children watching with their parents. So the goal was not to offend a parent's intelligence if they were sitting there watching this thing with their kids.
Yeah. That was something I always loved about your guys' shows, is the ability for, like, if I really liked it, I would be taping every episode that was airing on TV so that I could watch it 1 million times.
As a child?
Yeah. And so I would bring, if there was a particularly like solid episode, like, oh, I loved that one, be like, well, I got to show my mom that episode. She's going to love that episode. So I'm sure a bunch of yours made that list.
Did you watch The Late Mr. Kent with your mom?
I don't think I did. I don't think that one worked for me until maybe high school. But
what did your mom think of this show?
Well, I have a specific memory of my parents watching the Justice League series premiere, Secret Origins, with me as it was first airing in 2001, and they were both like really interested in it as it was happening. I remember specifically the first time you see Wonder Woman fly, that my dad was like, "Doesn't she have a plane? Why does she need to fly?" Like he was so confused about this.
How old is your dad?
He's 56 now, so this is 22 years
ago. Grew
ago.
up reading comic books.
They didn't actually. They watched my parents would watch the Adam West Batman show. That was pretty much their only introduction, and they're super friends, but that was about it.
But he knew about the invisible plane.
Yeah. I mean, I think Super Friends did that for him, or it might have just kind of been in the zeitgeist enough. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I had a problem with her flying too. I did. Just going back working on the Justice League, and I just said, "So how does Wonder Woman get around?" "Oh, she just flies." "Oh, okay, fine."
She could have used the lasso like Thor's hammer or something and pulled herself around everywhere.
No, I mean, in Justice League, they just gave her the power to fly.
Yeah.
Talking about the comics, there's one in particular that Bruce Timm himself wrote, which introduced Etrigan the Demon into the Batman animated world before the new Batman Adventures episode subsumed that comic book into canon for that episode. It's just an interesting thing because it's not something that happens very often, especially for the DCAU, where they would reference the comic book tie-in material.
You mean the comic book that at most 50,000 people read?
Right.
That's right.
Seen by millions.
That was later canonized in an interview read by like even less people.
Even fewer people, yeah.
Going back to working on Superboy, the guys at DC, Mike and Andy, would say, "Well, in the comic books, we did it this way." And then the guy who was my predecessor would argue with him and say, "In the comic books, which are read by 100,000 people, it doesn't matter because the show is going to be seen by a couple million people."
Mm-hmm.
There was always that argument. How faithful should we be to the comic books?
You're talking about growing up with like Silver Age of comic books being like those are just always been there. They exist in perpetuity. And for us, that was BTAS and Superman and Batman Beyond and that stuff. So it's kind of fun thinking of it that way, as like, for me, those are the characters. Like, I had no prior comic book knowledge. I mean, Ted was concurrently reading like 90s JLA and stuff like that, but
literally just gotten into reading the JLA comic book probably 6 months before the show came out. So I was the perfect demographic. Like, I was so excited for the cartoon because I had just discovered the books.
Yeah. So when we're always in these circles on social media and everything, seeing all these people on the flip side of what you're saying, being in the comic it was like this and they're not doing it how it should be and that kind of thing, right. And we're sitting here going like, I don't know what that's supposed to be. I just I know the cartoon. that's what it is to me. So
well, because the cartoons were far more widely circulated in comic books. The Superman of George Reeves was a completely different medium than the comic book. I mean, just two utterly different things, two different characters practically.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the George Reeves Superman, basically it looks like film noir, the men in the fedoras and the wide lapels and everything. And then Superman occasionally jumps in. I mean, the same thing with the Batman serials.
Right.
Which I remember seeing when I was about 10 years old and thinking, this is nowhere near as good as the comic book. And there's not even a Batmobile.
Yeah. But
now I think the people who read the comic books are leading the conversation. The comic books are no longer this obscure thing that 100,000 people read at most. They're the I guess the tip of the spear for the culture. What's in the comic books will eventually show up in the movies,
right?
In the big movies. And the people who write the comic books are kicking themselves that they're not getting the screenplay money.
Yeah.
That's
you're using a real screenwriter. You can't use a comic book writer, huh? What's wrong with me?
Who invented the thing you're writing about? Yeah.
Ain't it the truth? When Batman the Animated Series became the new Batman Adventures, you were on board the new team, but you didn't work on the original show. At that point, did it feel like a big barrier to have to live up to what was done before, or was it not yet considered, the cultural juggernaut that we've known it as all these years later?
It was the cultural juggernaut then too. I mean, I'd been working on Spider-Man at the same time that Alan and Paul and Bruce and all the others were doing that. We're doing the original Batman cartoon, and I mean, the reviews were sensational, and you didn't even need the reviews to turn on the thing and go, this thing looks incredible. Beautiful backgrounds, great character design, and really, really tight noirish stories. So yeah, that was a lot to live up to, really. It's still, I mean, look, it still holds up. You're still talking about it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Did you, by chance, did you when you went into the new writer's room, or I guess you said it wasn't really a writer's room, but when you joined that production, did you find yourself going back and revisiting older episodes to try to match tone, or because I know that they tried to kidify it a bit with adding Tim Drake and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of interested in, I guess, what the approach was.
Well, there was Robin was always in it. I mean, just whether it's Tim Drake or Dick Grayson. By the way, Robin is a character that no writer enjoys writing for.
That's the impression I've gotten.
Yeah. That's why he keeps dying.
It was always better. It was always better when it was just Batman alone. But I think just as the comic book writers realized around 1940 that their character of Batman needed a foil, I think this character of Batman needed a foil too. So he wasn't, and the fact that the foil is a kid, it gives Batman kind of a warm side, and it shows that he has sympathy for another kid who went through the same trauma that he went through.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
So it kind of warmed up Batman a little bit, which was a smart thing to do. I had been watching before I even got involved with Batman. I had been watching the cartoons, not religiously, but I'd seen a bunch of them and thought, this is really a good show. And I think my first script for Batman, the new Batman, would have been Never Fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I saw the Scarecrow episode just to, see where we, to see how we could spring off of that one.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a quick Never Fear question.
Yes.
So that gave us a revamped Scarecrow who had a much spookier and foreboding looking design than he did in the original series. And there's been several potential stories over the years about what might have led to this physical transformation for the character. So I was wondering, having written his first appearance in the new show, if you had any idea of what happened to the character of Jonathan Crane between the original series and the new adventures to transform him into this living nightmare.
I can't say for sure, but I do have a theory.
Okay.
The first, what do we call it? Batman how do we differentiate the two Batman?
BTAS and the TNBA, I guess, is the shorthand, but
BTAS was designed for the Fox Kids network. And I can tell you from my experience on Spider-Man that the people at the network looked at those shows very, very carefully. Constant scrutiny, constant notes. You couldn't get anything by. And again, it was the people at Fox would have insisted on making the show more kid friendly. Once Batman, the new Batman, had gone to the kids WB, they felt a little bit unfettered, and I think that they decided to make the show more of what they wanted to make it.
Yeah,
they didn't feel that they needed to be so friendly to kids. I worry that maybe we scared them too much.
I liked it.
There are definitely scary parts all throughout, but those parts have stuck with me, and I revisit a lot of the scarier episodes a lot more often than others.
I think some kids like to be scared. I had a phase. I remember a phase in third grade. I go to my elementary school library and just try to find all the ghost books.
Oh, yeah. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to the kids to not be scared, not be terrified.
Yeah.
To younger kids, they have nightmares. They think there's a boogeyman under the bed, that kind of thing. And then as you outgrow it, and you're 7, 8, 9 years old, you say, well, I'm tough. I can do this. It's the same. I think it's the same feeling that gets kids to go on a roller coaster or, go into a haunted house at an amusement park. I can do this. I'll show you. I'm tough. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
It is funny you talking about how, Batman the Animated Series originally being much more kid directed, and yet it's airing in prime time. I think we looked up at one point that it was surrounded on either end by Home Improvement and In Living Color. Like, it was just on in the middle of the afternoon for anybody. And then you go over for New Batman Adventures on a channel with literally the word kids in it. And you can put a noose around the Scarecrow's neck now. So, yeah. Airing on the channel that of the company that owns the product is probably a lot less scrutinized than.
And also the same person who was running the animation studio was also at that time running the network.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she hung out with the writers. She seemed to like us.
Yeah.
That was Gina Purdy.
Right. Mm-hmm. So how late, you're talking about Never Fear's your first episode. How quickly after that? I mean, maybe you don't recall specifics, but like you're writing chemistry, you're writing, what was the other New Batman Adventures episode that we had on here? Oh, the
Demon Within?
The Etrigan one. Yeah.
That's right.
You had mentioned in our emails that you were very happy you didn't have to write a rhyme scheme for Etrigan.
It's difficult to do that.
This was something I didn't even know the character did until Ted started writing an issue for our comic that Etrigan's in, and everything's in rhyme. Like, what is going on? The DCAU Etrigan does not do this, Ted.
I loved it, though. It was such a fun challenge. Yeah.
No, I asked Alan about that, and he said, "No, you don't. He doesn't have to rhyme."
I'd rather write Etrigan than the Riddler, though. I feel like rhymes are a lot easier to do than a riddle.
Coming up with a riddle.
I don't know.
Yeah, I did write a Riddler story for the Batman when Alan was editing that, and Brooke Shields was in it. Great to write for her because the story hinged on the Riddler's memory of a woman that he'd fallen in love with, and then the reality of that woman. And without anybody having to say anything to her, she played it as if it were two different parts, two completely different characters, because it was. Yeah. One was the character and the other one was his memory of the character. Totally different, totally distorted in his memory. So that I'm very, very happy with the way it turned out with her.
Yeah, The Batman is definitely one that's I'm going to have to rewatch it here pretty soon for a video we're talking about doing, but it was in the periphery when, Justice League was on, and it was kind of happening at the same time. My kid brain, my stupid kid brain is like, this isn't Kevin Conroy. I'm not going to watch this. But then when I go back and watch, certain episodes, I'll be like, oh, this was way better than I ever gave it credit for.
Yeah, but
it's good. Yeah.
For kids, it's always that way. I remember as a child watching The Lone Ranger, and there was a season where they couldn't pay Clayton Moore as much as he asked, and they brought in a guy named John Hart, and those episodes were never shown. They were never shown again because kids don't accept a substitute. That actor becomes that person. And then on Superboy, funny it should happen to me, but they had they replaced their Superboy after the end of season 1 with a new actor, and life went on. I'm sure a lot of children just went, no, this is I cannot accept this.
I feel like I think I can do this segue again. I think so. Speaking of people not acting like you expect them to, when Bruce Wayne is in chemistry, he ends up falling in love with a woman that is the only other time that we see him get this far, like marriage level, with anyone except for Andrea Beaumont from Mask of the Phantasm. You and I talked a little bit, or you had a sort of brief answer for this, but we've read that you and Alan Burnett had differing opinions on how much of this was pheromones from the plant creature and how much was Bruce just falling for this woman because she's the perfect woman. Tell us here, where do you stand on this, and elaborate?
The way I stood then, and the way I still stand is that she was willing to fit every single, I guess, a crag that he had in his personality, every burr, every thorn, she fit in that perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that was wrong. He should have known. He should have known that this is too easy. She's too perfect.
Well, I love the part with the like, that's called happiness or whatever it is. I like it. Like he doesn't know. Yeah.
And then when the plant lady turns to him at the end and says, "Look, it was too easy. I was too perfect. I'm a vegetable, and even I know that."
Yeah.
And he didn't. But anyway, so Alan felt that Bruce would have been too smart to have fallen for that. So he put in this thing about pheromones that drew him to her. But I've always felt that what made more sense is that, and what made more sense in the real world is that when someone fits you too well, I'm looking to see if my wife is behind me. When someone fits you too well, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a really adult story for such a kid. I mean, I say such a kid show, but like there's tons of, we keep going over how many mature themes run through this thing. It's a great way to like, I guess, prepare them with that message,
This will probably happen to you. The Ant-Woman will try to
prepare them for the coming storm.
There's plant creatures out there, kids. Watch out.
And then a follow-up on this, I've been editing the DCAU wiki a bit lately, and when I was looking at the page for chemistry, it has James Cameron listed as an uncredited writer. I'm assuming it's a joke, but is there any validity to that?
It must be a joke by someone. This is the first time I've heard of it.
I was guessing it's a Titanic joke just because of the ship that they're on, but it was very much like, we should make sure that that's not a thing. Or whatever.
So can anybody just put in anything they want to?
Technically,
pretty much. Pretty much. I've been trying to go in and clean it up and put a lot of sources and stuff lately, but
we're trying to do our part to keep it good. Yeah.
Citations and footnotes.
Yeah.
Yep. It's important.
It's not very funny though. Is it?
No,
not really. No,
someone thought it was, I guess. So you wrote the teleplay for The Call, introduced the Justice League for the first time. We finally got to see them. This is our first even mention of them existing in this universe before you got to finally go back and do that actual show. Was there anything in the episode that like you really wish you could have done that you didn't get around to, or by the time you did Justice League as a show anyway, you probably got multiple chances to toss in whatever you wanted?
Well, no, I worked off the outline, and what we wanted was kind of a quirky, weird future Justice League, and I think that's what the episode delivered.
Was there ever any version of it that had? We've read about how you guys didn't have the rights to use Wonder Woman, and so Barda's in there instead. Did that change at all any of the like story or script at all, or was it just kind of swap out the characters?
It was that.
Yeah. She didn't have too much of a presence, but yeah. And I'll go ahead and just tag this on. So when I sent you the original questions, I have, how did Warhawk get out of his armor before the explosion? And you just wrote, huh? And this is just a silly, nothing, stupid question that we wanted to toss in. There's just been this little like argumentative nature around the scene at the end of part 1 where you find out Superman is the traitor. He's got, we don't know yet that Starro's on his chest. Yeah. But we see the Batmobile camera showing Superman's heat visioning the rocket that blows up and supposedly kills Warhawk. Then in part 2, in like the first scene, Warhawk just walks in and says like, "Oh, I wasn't in my armor when the rocket exploded," and that's the entire explanation. And so everyone's just been like, When did you leave your armor? There's no time for you to have ever actually done that.
Haven't you ever seen those old Batman serials where they send the car over the hill on one Saturday morning, and then you come back the next Saturday morning and they insert one shot of a guy jumping out of the car?
Right.
I have a question. Did Hilary also write?
Good question. Maddie's got it.
I'm not seeing Hilary.
I do have I have a couple of good anecdotes. One of which is probably publishable.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm definitely editing this.
She actually jumped out of a car, a moving car.
Oh, geez.
I knew she was a motorcycle rider.
Right.
And there was no necessity for it. I asked her, and she said, I just want to see if you could do it, if it could be done. And then she just looked at me and she goes, you hit a lot harder than you expect.
God.
Yeah, I believe it.
She landed on concrete, jumping out of a car, going over just before it goes over the cliff, theoretically. I'm sure that the car she was in had to have been driven by somebody else. But still, just to see what it would be like Jesus.
She sounds like she ruled.
Yeah. Well, now I don't know if I want to even ask my next nitpicky continuity question.
I was going to ask, just real quick while we're on Hilary, just I guess can you speak a little bit to the two of you working together in the writer's room?
Mm-hmm.
If there was there a more formal writer's room during Batman Beyond?
No.
Just
what
about it? Yeah, over the lunch table then.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be I think we did Dr. Fate together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on the Superman show.
Oh, that was Superman? Okay, you're right. Yeah. Didn't she do Ink first, and then I did the second one?
Yep, she's got Blackout.
Is that kind of a process of if you're writing a sequel episode to some other writer's episode that you get with that writer to what would you do next, or figure out any ideas?
Well, I mean, if they're there, they're just down the hall from me.
Right.
We're going to talk to them. I think, with working with her and Dr. Fate, we, just chatted about the outline, but we did collect. I think it was a shared credit on the Dr. Fate episode.
Okay.
Am I wrong in thinking that the villain in that episode, Karkul, was an original for the episode?
Not as far as I know. I asked around.
No, he is from the books. He just wasn't very Cthulhu looking. I just did a quick Google.
Yeah.
He was just a bald guy in a green pants.
He looks way cooler in Superman.
He does, yeah. Much better design.
What's wrong with bald guys in green pants?
It's fine.
We got too many of those. So you also wrote the Batman Beyond episode Joyride. This is the Joker's gang stealing a big experimental military jet and flying around. There's a scene in it where they stumble on a hole in the ground where you see a skeleton that has a small bit of the Joker's costume, the original Joker, hanging off it.
Right.
At that time, was there any sort of knowledge of the Return of the Joker movie idea, or was that just kind of I don't know, toss him in there for a cool little cameo or something?
You know what? I don't know if Paul was already thinking about writing the Return of the Joker at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the fun of it is having, what did happen to the Joker? Because everybody's wondering what happened to him. What happened? Yeah. And I think showing that he was dead was a smart move, because otherwise, you're waiting.
Yeah, you're just waiting the whole time.
And the shoe's never going to drop.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if Paul was already considering writing that or not.
We already started touching on
Speaking of dead bodies underground.
Exactly, right? No, we've already started touching on the horror elements of your work with the Scarecrow question earlier. But one of the episodes that stuck with me for forever has been Earth Mover.
Me too.
It's just so incredibly haunting. It's such a just dark story, and it's not your typical comic book supervillain fare, as opposed to Ink or Stalker or Shriek or someone like that. So what was it like inventing this new kind of villain for Terry to face with, and did you have any issues with getting this script past censors at all? I know we've said things kind of loosened up a bit at Kids WB, so maybe that wasn't as much of a concern.
I don't think we had any problem with censors. I have a feeling that what you're reacting to is the design that the artist created, more so than the story, because you could imagine it being drawn in a more kid-friendly way. And I don't think it would have been as scary. I mean, the story itself is creepy. It's about a family that is torn apart, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that scares children.
You know, I think that like that might actually be part of why it stuck with me, honestly, is because around that time is when my parents were going through a divorce and a new stepdad was coming into play and that, and the other. Yeah.
There you go.
So
and big dirt monsters were coming out of the ground.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we traumatized you forever.
But I love it. I love it. That's one of my favorite episodes.
It is. Yeah. I think you're right. It's just interesting how there's so many comic book villains like Blight or Atomic Skull or whatever that are like, look, it's my bones. But when you just see just it's just a guy's skeleton in the ground, it's a much more visceral like, what's happening? I don't like this. I'm 10 years old. This is weird.
It's potentially real. That's real.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know if there was any talks for a big bombastic Batman Beyond series finale? Because it didn't really get one. Just was kind of time to end the show and move on, or
I thought the call was going to be the big bombastic ending. It's a 2-parter.
Yeah,
he's moved up. He's moved into the Justice League.
Yeah,
I thought that would have been perfect, but for some reason I don't remember why Unmasked was held up, and I don't remember why that happened.
I think it was a 9/11 thing because there's a big burning building as like a big set piece. Yeah. That's my recollection anyway. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the call was a big bombastic episode.
Yeah,
with a great finale. So
yeah, I thought that would have been the end. The call ran kind of at the end of the run anyway, didn't it?
Yeah, I had seen an interview recently with either Tim or Dini where they were talking about they were hoping that would be the last one that aired.
I just finally figured out, because I'm writing out a big spreadsheet for our podcast to go through all the shows in air date order, that a lot of the time Kids WB would just put an episode in a different time slot randomly that week. Like maybe they had some sort of event going on or something like that, and so it made sense later, but kid me was pretty mad.
No, it never made sense. I remember as a child, if I was watching Space Patrol or something like that, and like it's scheduled to go on at 4:00 and it doesn't go on, I would, go to my mom and say, call the station. I want to see the episode. Because back then there was no other way to see it.
Of course, yeah.
But if any of you do know how Space Patrol ended, please let me know.
I don't. I'm sorry. I wonder if that one's gotten lost to the archive, basement somewhere. Yeah.
I use TV Guide to also record my own VHS tape of all the Superman anime series and the new Batman Adventures episodes with a superhero guest star. So it was like the one with Dr. Fate, the one with Etrigan the Demon, your episodes. I would look in and be like, oh, this is going to have a guest star. So I just had one VHS tape with just the guest stars on there.
Why does that mean so much?
It was
That's
just fun.
a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, for me, I guess it was like, you've got your Batman anime series, but you don't have your Dr. Fate the anime series. So when he does appear, it's kind of a big, felt like a big deal.
Were episodes like that ones that you guys particularly disliked or liked any better than any other episode? Like you kind of forced to, put the Backstreet Boys in there or whatever.
What you're talking about with the Backstreet Boys is called stunt casting.
Yeah.
Where you're hoping to attract a new audience because you've brought in a star from some other walk of life. And that goes on in TV all the time, not just superheroes. It happens everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, let's see the star. Static Shock, I think that these other heroes were brought in order to try to get the show, the same reason as stunt casting, in order to try to get the show seen by more people.
Yeah.
And I think it worked.
It worked for me, yeah.
I think on the Static Shock, I'm pretty sure I wrote the Green Lantern episode. Because I remember sitting in that room in the recording studio, listening to Phil LaMarr.
Swapping.
Oh, it was unbelievable because usually an actor comes in and he'll read no, actually that's not true. Usually those shows are run like radio shows.
Yeah.
All the actors are there and they just go back and forth. And they did, Andrea directed that one the same way. So Phil's sitting there and he is alternating between three different characters. Static and Jon Stewart and evil Jon Stewart.
Yeah, Sinestro as Jon Stewart. Yeah,
that's right.
And you're sitting there because I was at such an angle I couldn't see him, and you'd swear there were 3 different people in the room. And he simply went through the script like that, switching over. He didn't do Static all the way through, then Stewart.
Yeah.
It just went back and forth like a radio show, and it was fantastic. I mean, I've never seen any. I mean, it was a real virtuoso performance from the voice actor. I mean, it was incredible that he was able to do it that way.
Yeah, there are way too many voices in that one man. James and I interviewed him like 5-6 years ago, and I don't remember if it was during the interview or the panel that we had watched him on.
Yeah,
but he kept like just going back and forth, like it was nothing.
Yeah, and those characters and Samurai Jack and everything, he would just be just immediately switching to the next one. Yeah,
a real gift.
Yeah,
a real gift. And Phil probably thinks, it's no big deal, because people who have gifts tend not to appreciate them as much as those of us who observe the gift in action.
When you were writing it, did you have to keep that in mind, that you knew Phil was going to be going back and forth like that during the recording process?
I didn't know how he'd be recording it.
Okay.
But, believe me, it's not just Phil. There are a whole bunch of actors there in whom we had enormous faith that they're going to do incredible work. So Phil isn't the only one. There are a lot that you could give them anything and they'd be wonderful.
Just usually you don't have one person juggling 3 characters.
I've never seen. I've never seen.
Yeah, that's probably very rare.
On that line, was there like, after that experience, did you have any sort of, let's bring Green Lantern back like 60 more times because he can clearly do this?
No, because you want to give Virgil Hawkins his own show, because whenever you bring in those guest stars, they're always bigger and more important than him, and it almost belittles the star, it diminishes him, and you don't want to do that too often.
Yeah, I've seen
his own way. Yeah.
Whoever it was that wrote the first Batman episode on that show was talking about how they intentionally made Virgil like an audience surrogate so that the audience is looking up to Batman.
It's a balance. I mean, when you have those superheroes on, you know that it's going to increase viewership, but you also know that you run the risk of diminishing your hero.
Yeah.
I mean, Static Shock adapted the characters from the Milestone world, and I just got through. They released the first volume of the Milestone Compendium a while back, last year or the year before, and I finally got through all of that. And I didn't I knew it was going to be more mature stories, but I don't think I fully realized the level of it. And adapting that stuff for children's TV, obviously you've got to take out a lot of it. Like 2 of the episodes that you wrote featured Hot Streak, who in the comics was like a white supremacist neo-Nazi character. So I'm just curious what the approach was, kind of recontextualizing that for kids' TV.
Well, you couldn't have him be a white supremacist. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could certainly have him dislike Static, but you couldn't say why.
Right.
I wouldn't have wanted to say why. I mean, God, you don't want to encourage them.
Yeah, teach some. Yeah.
Right.
Ain't that the truth?
I mean, God, when I started writing for network TV, for CBS stuff, we'd still get notes if we'd had an interracial relationship.
Oh, and wow.
And the note, goes back to the mid 80s. The note would be, hey, you've got LeVar Burton kissing this white girl. Mm-hmm. Are you aware that, we have, CBS has outlets in the South? Like, oh, okay, we're sorry.
Oh, geez.
That's the mid 1980s for live action stuff.
Nowadays you would just do it and deal with those people.
I don't know that they have a voice anymore.
Not one worth listening to.
This is all staying in the video, by the way.
If you're prepared to publicize the fact that I'm uncomfortable with white supremacists, feel free to do it.
Please do, yeah.
I think we can stand behind that.
You know what? I'm okay with that one.
Yeah.
The Kids WB got taken over by somebody else other than Gene.
Right.
And then we started getting a whole bunch of notes, and that was like the thing that I would have worked on Justice League anyway, but the thing that tipped it was getting the notes on Static Shock. Every word of dialogue. Okay, fine. I'll go across.
I could imagine Bob was telling us a lot of that in regards to how it impacted Zeta for him. And it just seems like it kind of became a hassle at the network at that point.
Well, with Zeta, they were complaining. The network was constantly complaining the show was too dark.
Right.
Did Bob tell you the story about the masseur?
I don't
think so. Hold on. You have a Zeta thing to tell me that I don't know?
I had nothing to do with Zeta, except we'd eat lunch together and I'd hear what was going on. So one of the guys who worked at the network was constantly complaining that Zeta was too dark, the endings needed to be happier, et cetera, and there was a lot of conflict. Well, eventually that guy at the network was no longer at the network and he needed a job. And the job he got was as a masseur. So Bob commented, finally, the guy's in a profession where everybody wants a happy ending.
Yeah. I'm glad you got to tell the story.
That's good.
Dwayne was, at that point, he was only a writer, a freelancer at that point. Very quickly around that time, though, we dragged him from Orlando to come to live in LA to be on the staff of Justice League.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like working with him alongside both Static and Justice League? Because he's such a big figure in both the worlds of animation and comics.
A source of constant ideas, inspiration. In a story meeting, you never felt that he'd run dry. There'd always be something. I always felt like, maybe he was worried that, he'd get fired or something. He'd have to keep thinking of ideas, but I might be wrong about that. What we had was somebody who always had great ideas. It was always just a fountain of them, and also really nice guy. I remember my wife. Goes back a long way. She'd purchased one of those white Mac books, those old heavy computers.
Oh, I remember those.
She wanted to download some music and didn't know how to do it, and I wasn't familiar with Apple at that point. So we called Dwayne. Dwayne, can you meet us for dinner at this Chinese place in Sherman Oaks? Help my wife, and sure, there's Dwayne. Pouring rain. He's out there. He's helping her download the music. A really great guy. I miss him very, very much. A genius, a literal genius, by the way. Literally a genius. He was one of those little kids, like when you're 12, you start college. Do you know about that?
Oh yeah. No, that was something that we had brought up in the we made a documentary about him a couple years back. That's definitely something that came up while researching all of that, was him going to college at like 12 or so.
Yeah, it was back in the mid to late 70s. He was on TV. They always do those stories on the news, like, 12-year-old kid starts college. And back then it was, I'd heard those stories before, but it was unique to see it was a black kid back in the late 70s. So I saw that in the late 70s on TV.
Oh, wow.
I saw him on TV. And then when he told me that he'd started college when he was a kid, I said, wait a minute, were you on TV? And he goes, oh, yeah. Because what had happened afterward, he told me, was that he went through college in physics. And then his mom just said, you know what? You have not been socialized. You need to go to regular high school with regular kids your age. So he went back either to high school or then started college. But when he started college again, it was to be in film. He was a film major. As you know, he was the same age as the other college students when he became a film major in New York, I think.
See him on TV.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, as a little kid.
We got to track that down.
Yeah.
The news footage of him.
Yeah.
We're talking about Dwayne's actual degrees, but he's joked that you have a degree in pseudoscience.
No, that was Dwayne. That was
for him?
I commented on him that he must have had a degree in pseudoscience because, whenever there was some bullshit
Yeah.
concept, like, how would you explain time travel?
Right.
And he would have some kind of a theoretical possibility for
The Einstein-Rosen bridge.
Oh no,
blah, blah, blah.
I've definitely found internet posts of him like explaining the time travel in the flashback episode of Static Shock. I found him explaining the differences in like the Justice League Unlimited Once and Future Thing time travel. He's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a protean figure who left way too soon. Way too soon.
Yeah.
Just to talk about something completely different. Justice League Season 1. So it famously features a version of Superman who's a bit of a weakling. And it I think in a way to help make the bad guys seem stronger and to probably give the other teammates more screen time. But particularly the episode Warworld is probably one of the like biggest offenders of this trope of a weakling Superman in Justice League Season 1. I guess the question I'm asking here is, were you looking for stories that could get Superman sort of out of the way?
I mean, bear in mind, Superman's strengths have always varied incredibly. I mean, you look at the Fleischer cartoons, he's struggling to stop a locomotive. And yet in the first Christopher Reeve Superman movie, he's able to spin the world backwards.
Right. Yeah.
Who knows how strong he is? It's just whatever suits the script at that moment. I mean, in the first or second Superman thing I wrote, it was I think a Parasite episode.
Mm-hmm.
He had to wear a helmet when he went underwater.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a conscious decision to weaken him.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he was either weak or strong, depending on what the stories needed. We were never eager to get rid of him because he was too powerful. We were happy to use him frequently. In fact, when we switched over to the half-hour episodes, at least one or perhaps even two of Superman, Batman, or Wonder Woman. Mm. So at least one of those three would have to be in it, and it would be fine if two or even all three were in it. Mm-hmm. So nobody wanted to get rid of Superman. He's just tough to write for, that's all, because he's so powerful.
Yeah.
Bruce Timm talks about how hard it would be to write for the Martian, because the Martian's even more powerful. He
can do everything.
And he can read minds, and he's a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Jean fan. You brought up J.M. DeMatteis earlier. He recently did Justice League Infinity, which was a sequel to the Justice League Unlimited show, and it focuses a lot on Jean, and it's one of my favorite of really all of the DCAU stories. I feel like at this point it was incredible. Jean is great.
It's because Mark wrote it.
Yeah,
that's true.
A writer who is really good at handling people's emotions, characters' emotions. Really good at that.
Justice League International is one of my favorite comic book runs
is that
ever.
Mark too?
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, over Keith Giffen's plots with Mark's dialogue.
Right, and
you
know that Mark's son works at Cartoon Network.
Oh, really?
Huh.
Cody.
Okay.
So we have to start a letter writing. We have to start a letter writing thing to get Robot Chicken back on the air.
Let's do it. Yeah, I'm on him in.
All right, Cody.
I know you have your favorites, but I like Robot Chicken.
No, that was
definitely one growing up for me.
Yeah,
it's been a while, but
I was gonna say Justice League aired at like 10 p.m. or something on Cartoon Network, and then it went right into Adult Swim and it had Family Guy and Futurama and Robot Chicken, and I watched all four in a row when I was supposed to be sleeping the whole time. Let's talk about Fury. My main question about it was that it aired before Injustice for All, which was the introduction of the Injustice Gang, and I didn't know if there was anything behind the scenes about that you
Yes, there was, but I don't remember what it was. I remember it's like the Unmasked thing where one episode is held back, and I don't remember why.
Well, so from what we've gathered, but I don't think I've ever seen anything official about it, is that there wasn't a video game called Justice League and Justice for All that was releasing around the same time, and they were trying to time the things. But then the episodes airing in reverse order was like Fury starts off with the Shade, I think, saying like, "Oh, the gang was much better. It's much better now than when Luthor was here." And little kid me going like, "What are you talking about? This never happened. I've seen and taped every episode." So,
little kid me was the same. I was like, well, why didn't they play that one first?
Was there anything going on your guys' side of like, or were you already, I'm way past this, I'm moving on to other stories, it doesn't matter to me?
Well, we had very little control over.
For sure.
No control over when the episodes ran.
Yeah. I mean, is it irritating to see that kind of thing happen, or do you just, whatever?
But in terms of your writing, you're way past that.
Yeah.
Way past that. And it's like, the network's messing around with it. I don't know why, but they are. And you have no control over it.
Yeah.
And I take no fault for mentioning Luthor.
It had happened technically.
But Arisha, is she the one who's poisoning everybody?
Killing all the men. Yeah.
So she's killing her own gang then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Parts.
I love that.
Go Arisha.
That was a shared credit between Dwayne and me, right?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think it was a part 1, part 2 split kind of a thing. Yeah.
That's a good episode.
Yeah. It's always been funny to me that kind of thing happens, completely out of your control. Because like we just discovered recently that 2 Zeta Project episodes only aired in Canada, never aired in the United States.
Oh, no.
And so I've been trying to track down exactly what day and time they aired in Canada, and like nobody has record of this. So it's almost as if those 2 episodes never aired.
I'm at the point where I'm starting to think Canada just doesn't exist.
Yeah, who knows? I've never been there. Have you?
I've been once.
I don't know. I don't think so.
To the airport. It could have been a fake thing.
Yeah.
That was the same soundstage as the moon landing, Ted.
Right. Yeah,
it probably was. Let me ask you another question about the writing process behind moving from these singular one-off episodes like you did for Superman and Static to the 2 and sometimes 3-parters that would happen in Justice League. So what would be the sort of different approach that you take to do those longer form stories for Justice League?
There's no difference in the procedure. It's just that it's much, much harder. The longer the story, and it's exponentially harder. It isn't just, twice as hard to write. It's really hard.
Do you consider like part 1 having like an act 1, 2, and 3, and part 2 having an act 1, 2, and 3, or does parts 1 and 2 have acts 1 and 2 bleeds between the episodes?
No, they all had commercial breaks.
Yeah.
So they were all designed around commercial breaks, and those commercial breaks give us our acts. Those are the acts.
That makes sense.
I was going to either guess it was way harder from that or way easier because you don't have to like cram your one idea into only 22 minutes.
No, it's way harder.
Okay.
Because it would have been easier if we knew for a fact that the episodes would that each half hour would be run separately. Mm-hmm. But we knew going in that they would be run together. So we're writing an hour of entertainment, and it's just really hard to make sure that people keep watching.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of choices, more choices every day. And
there was definitely both sides for me with Justice League, because I think season 1 did air as like part 1 this week, part 2 next week, and then season 2 was the full hour as a block back to back. So season 1 had, its cliffhanger ending, and oh my God, I have to wait 7 days before I know what happens. Whereas season 2 was like, oh my God, we're cresting the asteroid, and there's a giant brainiac head asteroid. What's going to happen? I'll find out in about 10 seconds. So wasn't as big of a problem, but they both had their positives and negatives, I think.
When I was working on Superboy, we had a 2-parter, and we had a cliffhanger. Yeah. And then right after the cliffhanger, there was a preview of what is going to happen in the following week. And the guy who edited that showed Superboy getting out of the cliffhanger in the preview.
Yeah. Oh, well,
Thank
I don't
you.
have to watch next time. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
No, whenever my wife and I watch an anime or something, a lot of anime has that at the end of it. Like, oh, next time it's going to be this. We purposely skip it. Like, I do not want to know what happens. I will watch the episode. Yeah.
It'd be funny if they ended up dying at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah. Oh, we have no clips to show. Yeah.
By the way, I was talking about cereals before. Have you guys you must have heard of the Spy Smasher cereal?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have you seen it?
No, but I know we know it exists because of the JLU
because there are two cliffhangers in the body of the 12 where people actually die in the cliffhanger.
Oh,
Really?
You come back to the next episode and it's like, yeah, he's dead. Swear to God, early on, they kill the comic relief guy. The guy you're sure is going to be through the whole thing, cracking jokes and stuff. He's dead. And then they kill. You think they've killed Spy Smasher, but then they come back at the next episode and they go, no. The one who fell off the building wasn't the Spy Smasher. It was only his twin brother.
Perfect.
You're a little kid and you're watching this and going, what? It was only the brother. That's fine. Identical twin.
One of your episodes is A Better World, which is the Justice Lord's introduction.
Yes.
Probably a favorite of all of ours. And it, of course, becomes much more important in the Cadmus stuff, which I think you were saying earlier is kind of where you wound up around that time when it started getting Cadmus heavy, was about when you left the show.
Right. I got an offer from the guy who produced Star Wars.
Okay.
Wow.
So it involved traveling a lot, like to England and Canada.
Different planets.
It was really nice. Really nice to be able to do that and to work
That's
with
cool.
Gary. Great guy.
Did you know at the time writing the Justice Lords episode that it would be much more of a connective thing going forward, or no?
No, but it started as a crime syndicate story.
Yeah, I have to imagine.
And then when you read those comic books, you go, God, this just won't work. It's stupid. It was. I mean, it's
a little corny.
Crime is good. Being a decent guy is bad. I mean, the stories would work if you simply did them from the point of view of the criminal. Mm-hmm. But if you're doing the whole world where crime is good and honesty is bad, it's just ridiculous.
It is a lot more black and white than what Justice Lords wound up being, which...
Yeah, well, that's what it became, was Justice Lords. And plus, don't forget it, even in Superboy, it always intrigued me. The idea always intrigued me of a superhero fully exploiting the power he had and becoming a dictator. There's an episode in Superboy called Roads Not Taken, where you see different choices that Superboy could have made, and then you see those worlds. And in one of those worlds, he becomes dictator of the whole planet. And that always fascinated me. And I think that was the concept behind Brave New Metropolis.
Yeah.
And it's also the concept of the Justice Lords. Nowadays,
we get a lot of online discussion about, I'm sure it's been happening for forever, but about DC continuing to go back to the well of, evil Superman. Wouldn't it be cool if it was Superman, but he's a bad guy? And it getting a little bit tired and old at this point that we've seen so many versions of that. But at the time when you're writing these episodes where you're exploring those themes, that hadn't been done nearly as much as it has nowadays. And I feel like that is, those two examples, Brave New Metropolis and A Better World, are like a lot more thought out of why they're doing these things, how it could corrupt them, how they can get out of it. So whenever that argument comes up of, it's just too much, I'm always like, go watch the Justice Lords episode. I promise you'll like the premise. Like you'll fall in love with this again.
Go read Justice League Infinity.
Yeah, exactly.
Or read or go back and stream Superboy Roads Not Taken.
There you go. Yeah.
Lex Luthor in that world is a freedom fighter who and Lana Lang is in love with Lex. And they decide they have to assassinate the great leader, Superboy, who's become basically a fascist dictator of the entire world.
Still going by Superboy.
Well, the problem was the actor was 32 years old. of the reasons that we got into it was that when I came aboard Superboy, I was told by the producers who'd been there years or like a year before. She said, "Look, there's not much he can do as an actor with the character who's just always a good guy, the big blue Boy Scout. But if you can find some way, like with Red Kryptonite or some other way of making him a bad guy, do that, because then he's really good." And he was right. We did one where there's a guy who happens to look like Superboy, who's a criminal, and he reforms. Any time that we could make Gerard Christopher a bad guy, we did it. Subsequently, I've told him many times, Gerard, if you want a good career as an actor, play Psychos. The guy looks like a male model and is unbelievably ageless. He just never got older.
Wow.
and he's terrific at playing psychos, really deranged people, but he just doesn't do it. So,
you'd never see it coming. Yeah.
He doesn't listen. Yeah. You know who was good at that? Do you remember an actor named Ed Burns? You remember the Fonz?
Yes.
Fonzie?
See, we're all also 32 years old. So.
Which one is it that did American Psycho?
Oh, Christian Bale.
Christian Bale, yeah.
Well, and then he goes to join Christopher Nolan and plays Batman.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. A few minutes ago, Stan, you mentioned how things follow you around sometimes, and the Royal Flush Gang is one of those concepts as well. You wrote their first appearance, Dead Man's Hand, and Batman Beyond. You also did Once Burned, and then introduced the new version into Justice League's Wild Cards episode.
There's a line that George Lazenby has. It's stolen from the James Bond movie.
Yeah.
All the Time in the World.
Yeah, we did a whole James Bond references video a couple of years ago. That 90% of it's on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah.
You know, I got Lazenby a job, and not on Batman.
Oh, really? Huh.
One of my first credits was a show called Cover Up. And I when I pitched it, I said, "Listen, can we bring in a British secret agent?" And they went, "Sure." And I said, "Well, can you hire George Lazenby?" And they went, "Yeah." And they hired him.
That's awesome.
Cool.
I've never met him though. He played it. He was on Superboy. He was on Cover Up, and he did a voice for Batman. But somehow we've never been in the same room together.
When we were talking to Dan Reba, he was telling us how the design for the Volcana episode, the bad guy in the Volcana episode of Superman, is based on George Lazenby, and then that Dan was then like in the mall or something and saw George Lazenby and just like ran up to him like, "Please, oh my God, can you be in the show?" And that's how he got hired for King and Batman Beyond. Yeah.
Dan and I have both given him jobs, huh?
Yeah. Him on Batman, yeah. Yeah, so we were talking earlier about Superman stuff in season 1 of having to kind of figure that out and tiptoe around things. Was the same. We've read stuff about season 1 also having a big lack of guest stars. I mean, Etrigan did find his way in there, and a couple other people, Aquaman and stuff. But the focus mainly staying on the founding 7 as a way to make sure that people understood who all the new characters were and got a good foundation. And then in season 2, you start tossing in these 60 bad guys from the other shows that, you know, are making little cameos and stuff like that. Was that kind of a positive for you, or was that more of a like, oh, really? I have to bring back Luminous? I don't want to bring back Luminous. Why would I do that?
I don't think that I had to work with
No,
them.
you did.
Bear in mind, it's hard to juggle 7 characters and give them service. You know, doing live action, it's hard to even juggle like 2 protagonists.
Mm-hmm.
You know, making sure that everybody gets a balanced amount of attention and about the same number of lines. But then you have 7 characters. Now, granted, you know, when you're doing animation, you don't have Carl Lumley, who's doing The Martian, complaining that he's not getting enough lines. Everybody's very good natured about that stuff.
Yeah.
But still, just as writers, you're trying to, you don't want to leave someone forgotten, especially in a big fight scene, because those are hard to choreograph when you have, you know, 4, 5, 6 of these really powerful people all slugging it out.
Well, so I guess an example of what I'm thinking of is like in the Secret Society episode that you wrote has you know, Grodd leading a group of supervillains.
Yeah, I wrote with Dwayne.
Yeah. So in the Injustice gang, you have your Luthor and Joker, but I think everyone else in that group was like a brand new villain to the show. So you're also introducing all these new villains versus Secret Society. You got Sinestro, you got Parasite, you got all these guys that are coming back from the older shows. Is that less of a challenge or more of a challenge to like mingle them with these other characters because you know them so much better than you do necessarily Grodd or Giganta or whatever?
Well, when you have that many characters, it serves you as the writer well that the viewers know them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you've got to do a backstory for everybody.
Clayface, that's the other one. I knew there was another one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, those were all on different shows before. And thankfully, you don't have to introduce everyone and give everyone a backstory.
Right.
So
yeah.
It saves time. It really does save time.
That's honestly something that I like about the Justice League shows and stuff, though, is that not every villain that they went up against had to have, like we didn't get the Copperhead origin story episode or that kind of thing. He was just there and I enjoyed him while he was there. So,
I mean, you see a guy like that, and it's a villain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. He's hanging out with other villains. And,
yeah.
The Copperhead from the serials was a guy who had a mask that looked like chainmail.
Yeah.
It was a hood. And then he got in fights with people. The end.
He didn't have one either. So you also wrote one of the issues of the Justice League Adventures comic book, number
Adam.
18. Which featured the Atom before he actually officially appeared on screen in Justice League Unlimited.
Right.
What was the difference between writing that comic versus writing an episode of the show? I guess particularly in like the scripting styles, but also did you feel like the comic did you have like more or less room to play with the story as opposed to an episode of TV?
I think the comic is shorter. If you wanted to adapt it directly to TV, I think you'd have wound up short.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Obviously, the scripting format is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the story. I mean, it turned out to be trivial and silly.
Yeah.
I remember the covers that Atom is in Superman's ear.
Yeah,
That
that was a
cover of
good
the book.
cover. I like that.
Yeah.
Oh shoot!
Yeah.
I think that was one of the first Justice League Unlimited books I had ever picked up.
It was like the Magic School Bus inside Ralphie. It was like they had to go inside Superman, and I don't know.
It was based on a thing from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Where the invaders they're aliens and they create this battleship, or a starship that's a battleship and it's going to destroy the world. And then when it comes here, you realize it's that long.
Yeah.
The invaders are real tiny little people, and someone just basically swats it.
Yeah.
And they're defeated.
That's right.
I was inspired by Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
I didn't steal from him.
Good to clarify. Yeah.
After Justice League Unlimited ended, you also wrote for, as you mentioned earlier, the Batman, as well as Batman the Brave and the Bold, Legion of Superheroes, Justice League Action, and a couple of the direct-to-video DC animated movies like New Frontier and Public Enemies. Was the experience different going into these projects since you didn't have to, I guess, carry, all of that continuity of the interlocked shows with you when you went to it? Yeah,
you're basically doing one-offs, especially with the direct-to-video thing. So those are completely one-off stories.
Mm-hmm. Based on comic stories, yeah.
Yeah, they're based on comics, but those comics always existed in their own world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's an exception to that in Public Enemies, because there was a whole sequence that I had to edit out where a Superman from the future shows up briefly to talk to Superman and Batman of the present. Oh. And that was because something else was going on in one of the other DC books at the time.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Wrote that. So anyway, I wanted to make sure that these particular DVDs were self-contained.
Yeah.
With Darwin's story on The New Frontier, there was no issue with other stories intruding. That Darwin wrote it in its own world.
Yeah, so I just read that one recently. Incredible story. I had seen the movie first, but like finally experiencing the comic, just wow.
Yeah, where he was trying to tie everything together. I mean, it's almost Einsteinian. It was a theory of everything.
That's so cool.
Where it was not just all the comic book characters, but also all the politics going on in the world.
Right.
This period of the late 50s to the early 60s.
Yeah.
So, quite a chore.
Darwin's another one of those ones that just like incredible mind.
Mm-hmm.
The essay you shared with the Superheroes Grow Up, talk a bit about your process with New Frontier being a PG-13 rating as opposed to writing, PG content for geared towards a child audience for the most part.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that, like having now the freedom to go into PG-13, how that was a little different for you.
Well, it's freedom, but do we benefit from the freedom?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
What's the question I posed in that essay, which is, now that we can make it more adult, do we run the risk of losing the kid audience and still not being adult enough for the adult audience?
Mm-hmm.
So I always worry about that. I mean, you're trying to, if there are these two stools at the bar, you're trying not to fall between them. You want to, but you still want to be kind of in the middle where you can bring in the kids and let the adults watch it.
Well, maybe don't bring kids to the bar.
Well, I get what you're saying. I get what you're doing though, because there have been a handful of DCAU or DCAU adjacent projects in the last few years where it's the characters and voice actors that we all know and love from the DCAU shows coming back, yay, but they're also cussing and they're talking about more adult themes and all this stuff where there's like a little bit of a barrier of, well, that's not how I feel like it should be, but at the same time, it's fun and cool to see them, kicking more ass than usual or whatever. So
that's fun for you, but what about? I mean, you're how old is your child?
2.
Okay, so you're gonna have to be careful.
Yeah,
right?
A little bit.
I'm thinking about the parent who goes and they haven't cared about superhero comics and comic books in a long time, but they've got a 5-year-old kid. Oh yeah, look, a DVD of Superman. I used to watch Superman. You buy it, you bring it home, and and you're hearing them talk in a way you just don't want your kid to hear that.
Yeah,
right. So, yeah, I mean, I worry about that. Then again, kids are far more sophisticated now than they were when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go a little bit more adult with the dialogue, I would think. But
I bet that probably impacts your storytelling stuff too, because this wasn't a show that episode you worked on directly, but like with Robin's Reckoning with Randy Rogel, he's talked about the scene of Robin's parents dying. They were going to originally show them actually falling and hitting the ground and everything, and when they said no, then you just get the rope swinging into frame, and it's way more impactful than it might have been otherwise. So I'm sure that's also probably part of it. Is you have the freedom now to do much more, but is that actually a burden or kind of a thing?
Sometimes when you're heavily censored, you find ways around that can be even more moving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And scarier too, because you're leaving it to people's imagination what happened.
Yeah.
There's an episode of Batman Beyond called April Moon, where at the very end the guy is under the knife on the surgeon's table.
Yep.
And the surgery is being performed.
It's so good. It's so good.
About to be performed on him by the man whose wife he stole.
Yeah.
And you just end it and you go, oh my God. What is that?
The drill starts and it fades out. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes that kind of censorship can be very helpful. And when you're in an atmosphere where there is no censorship at all, you can get very tired of all the explicit stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So were there any stories you wanted to tell that you didn't get a chance to, and whether that's Superman, New Batman Adventures, Justice League, Static Shock? I know we heard of one story where Superman would have potentially intervened to stop an overseas war. I'm not sure. Was that one of yours?
Yeah, I wrote like an outline for it. Never wrote a script.
Okay.
It was interesting. It was the point of it is you can change the course of a mighty river, but you can't change a person's mind.
Mm-hmm.
He tries to intervene. He's thinking, well, I'm Superman. I can make things better. And it's these two small countries European countries that are just at each other's throats forever, and they're always going to be doing that. And he realizes he can't help anything. The way we dealt with the lethalness of war was that rather than having a bunch of people killed, an errant missile destroys an art museum. The thing is burned down. So I discovered after writing that a freelancer offered a spec script. It was virtually the same thing as what I had written. And it was amazing because I know that there'd been no cross-pollination between the two of us. So maybe my idea wasn't as original as I thought. Happily, when I worked for Dwayne on Ben 10, we were able to do a story about war.
I was gonna ask because I had somebody when I told them that we were interviewing you, they brought up that episode, and I was like, wait, they said that there was an anti-war Superman episode. Was any of the Superman stuff kind of reused there at all, or other than the theme?
Well, this is more of a comedy, but you have Ben thinking, hey, I'm a superhero. I can stop these people from fighting each other.
Right.
And he can't. The way he thinks, well, I'm just going to kidnap the leader of one country and the leader of the other. I'm going to put them in the same room and they'll work things out, and they don't. And just he ends up uniting them in their hatred of him. I did one for Dwayne, and I ended up saying to him, Dwayne, in this episode, we're saying A, that evolution's real, and B, that global warming is happening. Are you sure you want to do that? Goes, yeah, do it. So we did.
Nice. Stan, were you on JLU still when they did the Hawk and Dove episode? It was pretty early on.
Yes, I was. That was Bob Goodman. I was
thinking that.
Yeah, there's very similar stuff there with take the leaders of the different Kasnian armies and put them in the same room together, kind of thing. So maybe it all just kind of hung around.
I think that Bob took on the story of the two worst superheroes as an intellectual challenge. I can do this. And it was funny. I mean, they had a great sense of humor, and probably a terrible idea for superheroes. Mm-hmm. One wants to fight everything and the other one doesn't want to fight at all. Like, well, maybe we don't need you, Dove. Go away.
That's why they killed him off on Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Spoilers. I'm going to skip my question because it was too silly. Just about you had already said, no, I don't want a character named after me like Dan and Butch got in Ben 10.
Were they actually drawn into the show?
They were. I don't know that they're necessarily supposed to look like the characters, but the names of the character, like Dreba and Blue Kitch or something like that. Sturkowitz would have been my choice, but it's okay.
You don't want artists making fun of you.
Yeah.
No. I'm real curious. I know a lot of people say now that whenever they read comic books, they hear Kevin's voice in their head.
Really?
When they read Batman. Yeah. And I'm curious if you had a similar experience when writing episodes of Justice League. Did you maybe start to hear the cast members?
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah, you got there. Yeah.
Yeah, always. You always do that. Whatever kind of writing you're doing, even live action, you always try to have a sense of them. The hard part is when the show hasn't been cast yet. Mm-hmm. Many years ago, I worked on an updated version of the old show Dragnet, which featured an actor called Jack Webb. Mm-hmm. Just the facts, ma'am. You've heard that line's very famous. Mm-hmm. So I'm writing the lead character, and no actor had been cast yet, and all I could do was I kept hearing Jack Webb's voice in my head as I wrote for that character, and then they did hire an actor, and that guy kind of channeled Jack Webb.
So I'll wrap this up. Is there anything coming up that you're working on that you'd like to tell us about, even if you can only hint at
yes, I had to write
some
it
stuff?
Down.
Yeah.
I'm working on a project that with some people in England, mm-hmm. and we're hoping that it will be an interactive podcast, if such a thing is possible.
Interesting.
It's called Fire in Rome. And I think you can look it up on YouTube. What exists now is like a 7-minute test. So
Is it kind of like a choose your own adventure type of thing? Like,
kind of.
okay.
Kind of. Again, Fire in Rome, and it's set in the year 60 AD.
Oh, okay.
I am working on something, maybe, possibly, with Mike Federale,
Yes. but
we don't want to say what it might possibly be.
I
And-
might possibly have also slightly worked on this thing.
Nice to know who my colleagues are. There's an animation company based in Vancouver called Big Bad Boo. I did a couple of episodes of their 1001 Nights TV series.
Oh, okay.
Them, and I'm also a consultant on some of their educational material.
Staying busy.
Yeah, it's cool to see that you're still involved
I
with
still
so
have
much,
time
yeah.
off
Yeah. Yeah.
to talk to my wife every now and then. Did you look her up? TeaganClive.
This tracks. I was listening to an interview you did on Batman the Animated Podcast, and you were talking about how you met Arnold Schwarzenegger. Through your wife.
Yeah, they knew each other from the gym in Santa Monica or Venice years and years ago.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Right. Anyway,
what a combo there. Yeah. Well, thank you, Stan, for being here. We really appreciate
it
it.
was fun. It was fun. I enjoyed doing it. In all seriousness, here were Alan Burnett and Paul Dini. They did write an outline for a Batman Beyond feature that might have starred Paul Newman as the elderly Bruce Wayne.
Oh, I think that part's news to us. Wow, the old car from
you
Cars.
just sort of throw names around at that point. I mean,
Right? Yeah, that's true.
They turned in the thing on Friday, and then on Monday, the executives read it, and they go, "No,
no thanks." Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, it's just like, God, all that work.
Yeah.
And the director, Boaz.
The guy from Remember the Titans.
Exactly. Exactly. Not really nice guy too.
I think Yakeem, I think, was the last name.
Boaz Yakin, yeah, and nothing.
Well, James Gunn is on record now for saying that he's the new head of DC Films. He has been looking to the Justice League animated series as inspiration. And I think that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Well, at least bring those guys into, in the early story formation.
Yes.
So that whatever hot young screenwriter of the moment will at least have a solid structure to work from.
Just a blanket thank you again, and it's been really cool to see when we get to talk to you or Dan or Rich or these people that we watch Justice League and their name fades in for 5 seconds and then fades out at the start of the episode. Those are the people that I really have to thank for creating everything in there.
And then we literally fade away.
I have known your name for so incredibly long, to the point where going into this interview, I was just like, oh no, this is a big deal. Oh no.
Yeah, it's the nerve.
So,
the obvious disappointment.
No, absolutely not. I've been out of water for the last 2.5 hours. I could have got up and left any time, but this was so engrossing.
It's always great.
Well, good.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Good night, gentlemen.
Good night. We'll see you later.
Intergang is hosted by the Watchtower Database. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for DC Animated Universe videos on a regular basis. This podcast is edited and produced by yours truly, James Strecker. Stay tuned for more new episodes of Intergang every month as we speak with some of your favorite writers, directors, voice actors, and more from the DC Animated Universe and beyond. Available on all your favorite podcast feeds and watchtowerdatabase.com. To support us on Patreon or nab yourself some sick merch, please visit the links in today's show notes. Thank you for supporting the show. Please leave us a 5-star review on your app of choice or leave us a comment on this podcast episode on the Pod Tower on YouTube. It helps tell the algorithm robots, hey, you should show this to more people, and that'd be just swell. Have a wonderful day, and all hail our Lord Darkseid.
Intergang.